you can see the narrative starting to change. The narrative is starting to change for the left. And the narrative is going to be that President Trump didn't just blow this thing. President Trump blew this thing because he is a racist, right? That is the way that this is going to move. And the reason that it's going to move this way for the left is because this is always the way it moves for Republicans. So during Hurricane Katrina, the initial rip on Bush was that President Bush handled it incompetently. The federal government, FEMA, should have been there. That heck of a job, Brownie. It was not a heck of a job. Then it quickly moved into the reason that George W. Bush mishandled Katrina is because it affected black people. And because George W. Bush didn't like black people. So I predicted a couple of weeks ago, this was the direction the narrative was going to move. Was that the Trump administration blew the response, and the reason they blew the response is because they didn't care enough about minorities. So the New York Times has been running with headlines nearly every day that are almost exactly the parodic headline once suggested about the New York Times. There's a very famous joke back in the 60s and 70s. The New York Times was going to run a headline saying, "Asteroid to destroy Earth tomorrow, women and minorities hardest hit." And that's basically the coverage they're running now. The coverage they're running is coronavirus to destroy all of America and world society, women and minorities hardest hit. Well, here is the problem with that. Coronavirus is a threat to everyone. And if you're looking at sort of the cross-cutting currents in terms of threat, race is not the best corollary. Race does not correlate the best. Okay, what correlates the best is pre-existing health conditions and age. Those are the things that correlate. Because it's not like the virus is killing black people versus white people. The virus is killing people who have diabetes versus people who don't have diabetes. The virus does not prey on people as a matter of race. It preys on people as a matter of pre-existing health condition and as a matter of age. Scientifically speaking, your melanin level has nothing to do whatsoever with how the virus affects you. Now, there may be a higher correlation of pre-existing health conditions and age and poverty, which leads to pre-existing health conditions with particular races. But that does not mean that the virus is racist. And it also does not mean that if you are black and if you are overweight and if you have diabetes, that the reason that you are dying of coronavirus is because American society is racist. There are a lot of decisions, a whole chain of decisions that go into how people eat, how people live. Maybe it's partially the legacy of racism. Maybe it's partially the legacy of what you do on a daily basis. But what we are starting to see is a shift in the media and in the coverage toward America is racist, and that's why more black people are dying. Right? Which is the same as America is racist, and that's why more black people are poor. Okay, not America was racist, and therefore there are lingering effects of racism in American society. America continues to be racist, and that's why we have to fundamentally restructure American society now. It's inarguable that there are always after effects of history. For everyone at every time, there are after effects of history. And then the question is whether the stuff that is happening right now is the impact of systems that are in place right now. And the left's suggestion is the racial inequalities that we see right now are a reflection of a current inequity in America that must be rectified by completely remaking the American system. That is the direction we are moving. So Ilhan Omar, of course, who puts this in the most bumper sticker fashion, she says the other day that the virus isn't racist. It's the systems we have in place that are racist. The medical system, for example, is racist. Now, what is the evidence she has that the medical system of America is racist? She doesn't really present any. But the idea is that on a plain level, if more black people as a percentage that are dying than white people, that means that the system itself is racist. Not that the system was racist 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. That segregation was a bad thing that has impact in terms of wealth ownership, and that may have impacts in terms of your ability to buy care because you don't have as much historic wealth. Okay, that's an argument, but that's not the argument she's making. She's making the argument that today, all of our systems are racist because of that inequality. All inequality is inequity in today's system. So here's Ilhan Omar making that argument.
The virus isn't racist, but the systems we have in place are racist. If we do not holistically address the kind of injustices that have existed within our systems, then we will not be able to fight this virus in the way that we need to, and we will not be prepared for other pandemics to come.
So socialism is the solution to the virus, right? Complete redistribution, slavery reparations. These are the answers to the virus, which of course is absolute nonsense because this refuses to even do the analysis necessary to demonstrate that higher rates of obesity in the black community are due to segregation in 1964. Right? You actually have to show the relationship, and more than that, you have to show that if you sign everybody a check, that's gonna fix everything, which of course it is not going to fix. Okay, it ain't. That's not gonna fix it. We've been trying to sign checks to people who are impoverished in this country for going on 40, 50 years, really since the New Deal, but certainly since the Great Society. It has not alleviated the inequalities among communities of color. Signing a check ain't going to do it. Okay, so Bernie Sanders is trying the same thing. Bernie Sanders has a piece in the New York Times today. It's called "The Foundations of American Society Are Failing Us." You wonder why people are protesting? The reason people are protesting is because they are deeply suspicious, and correctly so, that people like Bernie Sanders are reveling in this crisis as an opportunity to fundamentally reshape American society, divide us along racial lines, and then claim that if we want to go back to work, or if we disagree with his restructuring of American society, it's because we hate black people. Right? That is the next step in the media's narrative, is that if you want to go back to work, if you think that we have to acknowledge the risks to American society and also acknowledge that, by the way, the people who are losing their jobs are disproportionately black and Hispanic and low income, and those people do need jobs. I mean, they're going to need to work. Now, I want them to work. They want to work. Everybody wants to work. But the idea is that if you acknowledge this sort of stuff and you don't call instead for a government top-down reparations program that levels all of America's economic wealth, it's because you're a racist. This is the direction they're moving. So Bernie Sanders has this piece in the New York Times. He says, "We are the richest country in the history of the world, but at a time of massive income and wealth inequality, that reality means little to half of our people who live paycheck to paycheck, the 40 million living in poverty, the 87 million who are uninsured or underinsured, the 500,000 who are homeless. It is imperative we re-examine some of the foundations of American society, understand why they are failing us, and fight for a fairer and more just nation." And then he talks about Medicare for all, and then he suggests that we have a Byzantine network of medical institutions dominated by profit-making interests of insurance and drug companies. By the way, the hospitals are all losing money during this. Okay, the hospitals are having to shut down because they're not doing surgery on demand. Right? But then Bernie gets to his main point. He tries to tie this to racism. He says it's true that poor and working class people are suffering higher rates of sickness, are dying at much higher rates than wealthy people, which, by the way, has been true for all of human history, is that poor people are less healthy generally than wealthy people and have less access to resources than wealthy people because they are not wealthy. This is just a reality. Okay, that does not mean that the system is racist, but he says it is because the system is racist. He says many in our country are now beginning to rethink the basic assumptions underlying the American value system. Right? He says, should we really continue along the path of greed and unfettered capitalism? Or should we go forward in a very new direction? He says we should follow the path of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who knew that economic rights must be considered human rights. So we're going to use the back of this pandemic in order to completely reshift how Americans interact with their government and what government is supposed to do. He says the new America must fight to end starvation wages and guarantee a decent paying job to those who are able to work. By the way, you know what just happened? 22 million people lost their decent paying jobs, thanks to the government. But this is the next move. And this is why people are protesting, right? People are saying, we can see you using this for your political point scoring. The New York Times has a piece today titled "How the Coronavirus Became a New Frontier in the Fight for Civil Rights." Jesse Jackson is calling for the creation of a new Kerner Commission to document the racism and discrimination built into public policies that make the pandemic measurably worse for some African Americans. So we're going to divide the country in a time when it needs to be unified in order to score political points. And then when people protest and say, listen, I think that you're using this for ancillary purposes. Right? I think that you are using this crisis for ancillary purposes. For many politicians like Gavin Newsom to fill in your state budget with federal dollars. For politicians like Bernie Sanders to fundamentally reshift the nature of American free markets. For race-baiting politicians to divide us along the lines of race and suggest that America continues to be, not was, continues to be fundamentally racist at its core. The Beto O'Rourke view of America and its history. And then Americans say, well, you know what? I'm kind of suspicious of you guys. I'm kind of suspicious. How about this? How about we're responsible and we'd like to reopen? And then the Huffington Post labels you a protester from Charlottesville. Seriously. The Huffington Post has a piece today, says the president's enabling response of right-wing protesters echoed his handling of the 2017 violent white supremacist rally in Charlottesville. To equate everybody who is protesting to go back to work with people who hate black people is just insane. But this is the narrative. This is the narrative. Everyone who's protesting is bad-hearted. Everyone who wants to reopen society is a racist. Everyone who doesn't want to remake the American system on the back of a pandemic is denying the realities of a fundamental American evil. You want to divide everybody and make people, basically ignore government orders and go back to work? This is pretty much how you do it.